2, we're live.
All right, this is Flex Wheeler with another edition of Flex for Life with my co-host Greg and our special guest, Dr. Scott. Dr. Scott, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Flex.
Great, great. So tell us a little bit about your background.
I started out as a pediatrician. Well, I guess grew up in California, moved to Nebraska, finished my school, did medical school at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska, moved to North Carolina and did a pediatric residency at Duke University Medical Center. And then I've been in Roswell, New Mexico ever since then. I did a pediatric practice for 28 years, and then for 15 years, I did a mold practice also. Did both of them at the same time, basically.
So let's talk about that a little bit more, because that's where I come in. This mold thing, I know when it was first brought to my attention, my first thought was like, how could there be mold inside a human being? I heard about it in your faucet, in your water, but tell me, how did you begin those studies?
Well, there are a couple of different ways. There's the kind of spiritual way, and then there was the practical way. Which one do you want to hear?
Let's start with the practical first.
So there was a local businessman in my city whose daughter had gotten very sick while she was attending one of the local high schools. And he had the means to go to a number of different doctors around the country because nobody local could tell him what was wrong with her. He finally ended up seeing Dr. Richie Shoemaker, who was in Maryland. And he said immediately, oh, okay, this is mold. And it was probably from the high school. And she probably shouldn't go back to that high school. And let's start her on therapy. So that businessman came back and he talked to the school district and said, I'd like to pay for the testing, to do actual testing for mold in your school. And that was going to be a lot of money. I wouldn't have been surprised if that testing was $100,000, because it's a big school. I mean, it's 100,000 square feet of basement, 100,000 square feet of first floor. And the school rejected his offer, and they did some substandard testing, and it still came out showing that there was a problem, but they chose not to do anything. So the businessman sued the school district, not for money, not for damages to his daughter, but to force them to do the right kind of testing. And that's where I got involved. They had been in the going back and forth for probably 2 years at that point. And the businessman talked to a friend of mine. The friend of mine said, hey, would you do a favor for a friend of mine? I said, who's your friend? He mentioned the name. I said, oh, yeah, he's a local businessman, isn't he? He's thinking about mold and suing the school district. And it's like, at that time, I needed to learn about mold. And so I said, yeah, I'll talk to him. I figured I'll get some information about it. And it was intriguing. I thought, I'd like to know the truth. I want to see. Because when we were in school, they taught us that mold really can't harm you. But before I finished residency, we knew that mold could trigger an asthma attack. Mold could even cause asthma in some people, chronic exposure. These are things that I wasn't taught in school, but we were learning as a society. And so I wonder what else mold could do. And so that was my entryway.
So mold in the body, what are some of the common reactions that a person can get that would even alert them that they need to get tested?
Yeah, and that's part of the confusion, to be honest with you, Flex, is that mold can do a number of things. Like, we've known for a long time, mold can cause allergies. It can cause your nose to get runny, your eyes to get watery. And we also know that mold can be a local irritant. Mold can cause superficial skin rashes and things like that. But what I'm involved in is mold can cause problems in multiple areas of your body. So it can affect your cognition, your short-term memory, your ability to focus and concentrate. It can get so bad that you can, on occasion, forget who you are, like forget your own name. You can forget where you are, even though you might be in your own neighborhood. You look around and you're not sure where you are. mean, it can be that serious. It can also cause chronic fatigue. Not just fatigue like you went to the gym and you worked out and you're tired, because you know that you recover from that. But this is a fatigue where it doesn't matter how much sleep you get. When you wake up, you're not rested. You push yourself through the day. Maybe you have a 9-to-5 job, and when you get home, you're just exhausted. And at 7 o'clock at night, you're curling up on the sofa, kind of crashed. And that's the end of the day for you. And then you wake up again 7, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, have to get ready for work. That kind of like bone crushing fatigue. It can cause recurrent headaches, migraines, tension, etc. It can cause stomach issues that eventually will be called inflammatory bowel syndrome, which, I mean, we really don't have a diagnostic criteria for that, but they'll call it IBS. It can cause muscle aches and pains that are so profound that over the years it'll eventually get called fibromyalgia. It can cause problems in your joints. It can cause problems in your circulation, in the way your heart beats. It can cause all sorts of problems. It can affect your autonomic nervous system, which determines how fast your heart beats and how quickly your lungs breathe and how deeply you breathe, and all these things you don't think about. It can cause problems in literally any area of your body, your hormones too.
So just to jump on that one, sorry to cut in real quick. Our follower base is very fitness aesthetic oriented. So you've already named some things. I mean, you brought up the autonomic nervous system, so there's hormonal issues there, and you brought up aches and pains. How could this affect a guy or gal in the gym trying to look better naked, negatively?
Right. So first of all, by God's grace, it doesn't affect males as much as women. They're probably 3 to 1. There we go, 3 to 1 women to men that I see in my office. And part of that may be because men are more in denial. Maybe they don't pay as much attention. Probably your fan base pays more attention to different symptoms. And maybe it's testosterone or other hormonal reasons. We just don't see men get it. They can get just as sick as women, but it just isn't as common. But getting back to your question, it's not unusual to gain 20, 30, sometimes even 40 pounds for no reason whatsoever. Like no changes in your diet, no changes in your activity level, and yet you're just putting on weight. And it's a hormonal thing. It has to do with the hypothalamus in your brain and the level of MSH that you have. That's alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone. And those can do that. Supposedly, like I said, not even changing your appetite, just the way you metabolize food. It can also cause problems in your lungs, what we call pulmonary hypertension. So you can't exercise as well. You get short of breath very quickly, maybe doing very little exertion. It can also cause shortness of breath through other mechanisms. And on top of that, if you want to get down to the cell level or in the cells, I'm sure you know the difference between aerobic and anaerobic metabolism in the cells. When you have aerobic, that includes oxygen. You take a molecule of sugar and that oxygen and you put it in the cell, use the mitochondria, you get $36 worth of energy. But if you don't use oxygen, you get $2 worth of energy. So it's much less efficient to do it without the oxygen. Well, we find that in people that have this illness, they don't get their blood flow as well to their fingers, to their toes. I'm not going to show you my feet. But also to other peripheral areas like your nose, your brain. The blood just doesn't get there as much. And we have actually demonstrated that in patients that have what some people call mold toxicity, mold-related illness, chronic inflammatory response syndrome. We've seen that on MRI tests that look at, or that can give you markers of blood flow in the brain. We've seen that there are certain areas that are just not getting adequate blood flow. If you don't get adequate blood flow, you don't do very well. If your muscles don't get adequate blood flow, they don't make the energy that's necessary to do your workout and to look all mean and to flex. I had to throw that in there at least once. Sorry about that. You just, and you feel tired and you feel terrible. And if you try to work out, you can't. And not only that, but you switch from aerobic to anaerobic metabolism while you're doing your workout. You start burning glycogen, and then you get home the next day, and instead of recovering within 12 to 24 hours, it actually takes you maybe 2 or 3 days to recover, and you just don't even want to get out of bed, because you basically created an oxygen debt for yourself in a situation where you can't just turn it around really quickly because what's going on inside the cells. We have a fancy name for that. It's called molecular hypometabolism. And what it means is at the cell basis, you're just not making enough energy. And if that's global, it means your entire body is not making enough energy. So it's hard enough for you to get in the shower, much less go and look out and look your best. Did you say naked? I think you said naked.
Yeah, I could naked.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think they'll understand as this compounds, because they might not want to get out of bed and go to the shower, but they will force themselves to go to the gym again. And you talked about debt. Debt and deficit are two different things, and they're just adding on to the conundrum, right?
That's exactly right. You know, when I was a kid, we had this saying, and I'm sure you've heard it, it's no pain, no gain. And it's saying you got to work out, you got to push, you got to keep pushing, go past, you can do it. Okay. And if you don't, well, you don't get the kind of gains that you're looking for. But if you have this illness, I have a different saying. I coined this one. You can give me credit for it. It's pain, no gain. Because if you push yourself beyond where you're like with aerobic activity, you're trying to increase your aerobic capacity. You're trying to improve how well your lungs bring the oxygen in, how well your heart beats it and sends it. You're trying to improve all those things. But in these people, it doesn't matter how good those are, because at the cell level, if they've got adequate amounts of oxygen and adequate amounts of sugar or glucose, the cell is not using the more efficient way of making energy, regardless of how much of those are there, because there are other things in the genetics, the enzymes and chemicals that are being made that are necessary to make those extra 30, 34 ATP. Mm-hmm. You're just not making those enzymes. And so it doesn't matter how much oxygen you get in, you're still going to shunt it in the wrong direction. And so you will always go, if you push yourself like that, you'll go into the oxygen debt because you had an oxygen deficit and you continued to push. And so it develops what we call push crash, or the push crash syndrome. You push yourself through and then you crash for 2 or 3 days. It's very common in most of the chronic fatiguing illnesses we see, like chronic fatigue syndrome. You're not making the energy. And so if you push yourself, you'll crash.
And how does this affect digestion and absorption and elimination?
Oh, wow. Yeah, good questions. Mm-hmm. So about 93% of the people that have mold toxicity will have a low level of that chemical I mentioned before, MSH, alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone. That is made up in your brain, and it helps you to sleep. It helps you to metabolize food correctly. It helps your neurons to fire properly. It keeps your innate immune system in check, in the proper balance. And it also affects the lining of your gut. So if you don't have adequate amounts of MSH, that top level of tight junctions that we have in our gut that keep the food in the gut unless we want it, the digested food, if we want it, we pull it in out of the hole of the gut. It's like a donut hole, right? Starting here, ending at my anus. It's not actually in my body. It's kind of going through my body. But if we want some of those nutrients, we actively identify them and pull them in. But if you have a leaky gut, because the tight junctions that keep it in the hole of the fancy word is the lumen, that keep it into the lumen of the gut, then some digested particles will start getting where they don't belong and where immunologically they were never intended to be. And that can cause you to start making antibodies to them, like you might see in celiac disease. That can cause you to start having food insensitivities or food sensitivities, to one or maybe hundreds of different foods. And so then you can start to malabsorb, you can start to leak, You have all sorts of problems, pain, bloating, gassiness, etc. And it's hard to make that diagnosis if you're not looking at the MSH level. And a lot of people don't.
And is that something you test for in your?
Absolutely.
Oh.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You talk about the symptoms that you can get. They're very wide and scary. I mean, almost anyone can identify to any of those at one time. I was fortunate to have you test me and test my blood and everything like that. And actually, I was really surprised that it came back as well as it did.
Really?
I would say you have other things. I don't want to talk specifically about your health because we have that confidentiality.
Sure.
But there are certain other things in your healthcare plan that might have mitigated that.
Yeah, definitely. So which I know the answer already, but if someone is concerned that they may have mold in their body, what can they do? How can they find out?
I think they should probably just yell and scream and put their head on a baseball bat and run around in circles. No, I'm kidding. I am definitely not a person that recommends panic. And I'm not a person that recommends hopelessness either, because there is help. There are ways to approach that. There are ways to, if you think you're being exposed to mold, for instance, to evaluate your house that don't require a doctor's order or even a doctor's visit. There are ways to test your blood looking specifically for mold toxicity. I'm not a big fan of the urinary mycotoxin test. I know a lot of people use that. And the reason is because I think that just shows you have an exposure. It doesn't say whether the exposure is because of the chocolate you ate or the coffee that you drank or because your house is a water damaged building. It doesn't distinguish between those. So I don't usually order that. I order tests that actually show me that there are changes going on in the immune system that are consistent with somebody who has this chronic inflammatory response. And that to me is proof. And then we look to see if you're getting exposed and try and fix those things. And then beyond that, there are places you can get help. There are a number of doctors and nurse practitioners and naturopaths who have been trained in the only peer-reviewed published way to treat this. That comes from Dr. Shoemaker. And so you can go to survivingmold.com and that's all one word, of course, survivingmold.com. And they have an interactive map that shows you where those trained people are throughout the country. Or you could go to moldco.com and take their 10, 15 minute, it's not really a test, it's a survey of what's going on with your health. You can take that and usually the next day or within a couple of days, that's going to get reviewed by a provider that has knowledge about this illness and the proper way to treat it.
And how can they contact you if they're interested in getting a workup through you? If you can just let us know what your website is.
Oh, wow. I closed my practice. So I've been doing it for 15 years. I closed it in January of 2025, earlier this year. And then about a month later, I had been a consultant for Molco. About a month later, I became the medical director for Molco. So okay. I don't actually see patients anymore directly. I do sometimes have educational visits. What I usually do is I oversee the training of all the other providers, and I sit in on their calls to make sure that what they're saying is correct. I'm involved in training from day one, and I watch them for a period of time until I'm comfortable that they're doing it right and they know enough to be set loose on the population.
So I was pretty special that I actually got to speak with you and have my results read to me.
That's exactly right. The CEO of the company said, I want you to have an education session with Flex Wheeler and go through these labs. So that's not the norm of what we do. It's only for VIP. But I am sitting in and watching over most people's visits with the nurse practitioners that I've trained to make sure they're doing a primo job.
Now, is there anything naturally that a person can do? Any natural remedies that can cure this at all?
Yeah, there's really two main things that you need to do to get better. The first one is you have to avoid the exposure. And I'm for a second, I'm going to draw. I'm going to point to say like a cat allergy. Now, this mold illness is not an allergy, so I don't want to confuse people. But if you had a cat allergy and you spend all day with cats in your house, and they're going around and putting their dander everywhere, and they're sleeping on your bed with you and whatnot, it's very unlikely that we're going to be able to get you better from your cat allergy symptoms, even if you take medicine. The number one thing you have to do with any environmental illness, and this is an environmental illness, is you have to get away from the exposure. You have to get away from the exposure. Then the second thing that you have to do, because some of that exposure has gotten inside you, and for whatever reason, it's still inside you, and it's still triggering your immune system, even though you're out of that exposure. So like if you moved houses, went to a great house, a lot of people are not going to get better until they do the medicinal step that comes next. And we just know that. And I can even predict who that's going to be based on blood work. But having said that, you got to take a medicine we call a binder. And we use a prescription strength binder because in my experience, and again, I've done this for 15 years, I've seen 2,000 patients at this point, written 13 articles, in the peer-reviewed published literature, been involved in lawsuits, have spoken before adjuncts of the House and Senate Armed Services Committee. I mean, I have a little experience. What I know is that if you don't take the binder, you're not going to get better, but all binders are not created equal. The prescription binders usually work in 2 to 3 months. And then coming back directly to your question, there are more natural versions of binders that are more easily tolerated for some people. But in my experience, they take a lot longer for you to get better. So whereas the prescription maybe in 2 to 3 months, the binders, my experience is 2 to 3 years. I mean, that's a big difference in wanting to get better. So I try and start everybody on the prescription if they can tolerate it. If they can't tolerate it, I mean, there are things that we do to try and get you to eventually be able to tolerate it because it's just so much better, so much faster, at least in my experience.
So you say if they can tolerate it, is it something that strong that, or let me ask you this, in which ways can some of the patients not be able to tolerate it?
Great question. And it's not so much the side effects of the medicine per se, because the medicine we use isn't even absorbed by your body. You take pills, they go into your gut, and they do their business, which is to bind onto negatively charged ions. That's a chemistry term, but most big molecules will have a negative side and a positive side, maybe multiple negative and positive sides. If it sees one, it'll bind onto it, and then that medicine will take it out in your stool. And so you're basically detoxing your gut and your bile. And that, if you're storing that stuff in other areas, like your liver or your fat cells or your skin or even your bloodstream or your kidneys, it'll start pulling it out of those places toward your gut. And then you take another dose and it binds onto that and so you're actually detoxing the whole body. Some people who've been sick usually for a long time don't detox very well. Or they haven't been detoxing for a while. Maybe some of their pathways are blocked or whatever. But what happens is if you detox them too fast, if you clean that stuff out too fast, they have symptoms from the actual detoxification as opposed to from the medicine.
Understood.
Wow. So I'm kind of envisioning, I mean, you said it's coming out through the gut situation. If it starts getting to that point, it's working, it starts pulling it out of the liver and other organs, there could be some negative side effects to that, right? Because now it's becoming systemic again.
I mean, primarily what happens is as you're pulling it out, it can actually trigger what you're trying to prevent.
Got it.
But you got to get it out. So from my point of view, it's a detoxification reaction. I know that the medicine we use is called colesevelam. We use it in an off-label indication, and I'd be happy to explain that if you like. But we use it and it pulls out negatively charged ions. It pulls out cholesterol. If you take it at the same time as some of your medicines, it'll pull that out too. So we time it so we don't do that. And we just have to kind of gauge it. Some people can do it really fast, can start at full dose day one. But for most of our people, we recommend, a little bit of pre-treatment beforehand. We don't start at full dose. We start at about 1/6 of the dose. We work you up over a few weeks to try and minimize the likelihood that you have what we call the intensification. And that is where like all the symptoms that you have actually get worse before they get better. So we try to minimize that. And that can happen with any kind of detox that you're on. If it's too strong, too aggressive, it's a problem. So slow to do it, still get better over 2 to 3 months.
And this is overseen by your nurse practitioners for the most part, or?
It's overseen by the nurse practitioners, but I oversee them. So I'm still involved with that. We have meetings of the entire clinical staff 3 times a week where we go over every case that we have as we're building the training. So I'm really very intimately involved, even though I may not be the one who's actually delivering the healthcare.
No, I think what I'm trying to get across is this is not something you should try through MD.com or anything along those lines on your own with something you bought off of Amazon. This is nurse practitioners and physicians overseeing the whole process, which is, I believe, important because you have to take it step by step.
Yeah, we're overseeing it every step of the way. We have a patient portal at Molco that people can, if they're having complaints, we actually have 3 different levels. If the care navigators can handle it, which they can handle probably 90% of the questions that come in, we let them handle it. If not, it goes to the providers. And if they can't, then I take it. And I have a lot of experience. And then again, we have several meetings, like I said, a week where we go through these questions, continuing the ongoing education for our care navs and for our nurse practitioners. And we just answer all those questions. Try and get your answer back to you in a day or 2.
Nice.
So you mentioned that it seems like women have this problem more than men. Is it just that women get tested more than men, or is there some type of hormonal reason why this happens?
I think it's probably both. I think in general, when women have symptoms, they usually want to talk to somebody about it or maybe go see a doctor or something like that. I think when men get symptoms, for the most part, I mean, I can't generalize to everybody, but they kind of either they blow it off, I'm a man, I'm macho, that's not going to affect me, or they kind of, maybe are a little more in denial. So I think that's a part of it. But I think the bigger part is probably there's something different, and it's probably hormonal. My guess is it's the difference between estrogen and testosterone, but I don't know that for sure. I'm only speculating.
Right. And just to be clear to people, mold is the same thing that's found in a house, in your drinking water, and so on. That's the same thing that you find in the body.
Well, yes and no. So when you breathe something in and when you ingest something, drink it or eat it, the 2 things are processed very differently. So if I eat something or drink something, like a cup of coffee, and we know there are mycotoxins in coffee, but that coffee first goes into my mouth, and I have very high pH saliva in there that will attack the chemicals that are in there. And then it goes down your esophagus into your stomach where you have low pH, like almost as strong as possible hydrochloric acid in there that also will alter some of the chemicals, not all. And then it goes into your intestines where you have all these different chemicals that are designed to break things apart, so that you're taking, initial food and you're breaking it down into individual ingredients to fully digested amino acids and sugars and whatnot that your body can choose to absorb or not. And then if you do absorb them, they go directly to the liver, where the liver detoxifies a lot of things. So you've got multiple different steps where even if you're eating something with mycotoxins, you can break those apart, maybe, depending on what the toxin is. When you inhale something, you're inhaling it directly into your lungs, and it goes directly into the bloodstream. So it skips the mouth, it skips the esophagus, it skips the stomach, it skips the intestines, and it skips the liver. You skip that whole detoxification process, and it just goes straight into the bloodstream, goes throughout your body, and then it comes back and then goes to the liver. So there's a huge difference. And not just with mold and mycotoxins, but almost every poison that I'm aware of, if you can aerosolize it and you breathe it in, it's far worse, maybe 100, maybe 1,000 times worse than if you eat it.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, and I know that on the internet, there are some people that really talk a lot about the mycotoxins that you're ingesting, and mycotoxin-free diet, mycotoxin-free coffee, maybe there's mycotoxin-free chocolate. You've also got cheeses and red wine and peanuts. I mean, there are a number of things that you can, cereals, a number of things that you can get small amounts of mycotoxins, but they all go through that process. And while we know that if you eat a lot of, say, moldy hay, I don't know how much moldy hay you eat a day. I try and limit that in my diet. But if you ate a lot of moldy hay and that's the only thing you ate, yeah, you can get super sick. And that's in that, I mean, it can even kill you. That's in the literature. But I don't know anybody who does that. And so we actually are getting like really minute amounts of mycotoxins through the food that we eat or ingest. I believe we're getting much more of those particles through our lungs. And not only that, but when I talk about this illness, I'm not even talking about the toxicity of the individual mycotoxins. I'm talking about the immune system recognizing this as being foreign and activating the immune system. And as a result of that, causing problems in the immune system that then spill over to every other system of your body. And mycotoxins might be doing something on top of that. But we know that because, again, I've seen 2,000 people. I've worked with people that have seen, to get all together like 30,000 people. And we see the same abnormal lab tests in the immune system with all of these people that go on to have multi-system illness. And that's what we're treating at Molco.
All right. So obviously, I'm not a doom and gloom guy, but I know you'll probably see where I'm going with this. I've had a gym one time where there was a pipe break and we had a little bit of a flooding issue. And, one of the big things for us was to try to get all the water out, get as dry as possible, using some anti-mold stuff underneath the carpets and everything else. I've been to the airport near Flex's home at Las Vegas, which is not the cleanest airport in the world. My high school is a registered historical site, so it's over 100 years old, right?
Right.
What are we looking societal-wise at issues that we should be? I mean, our insurance guy was all over us about making sure that our gym was about as mold-free as possible.
Right.
So what are some red flags we need to look for just in general? Like, I mean, it's schools, old buildings, old airports where people are drinking their heads off. What are we looking at here in our world?
I'm not a doom and gloom guy either, but I'll tell you that the EPA put out a study called the BASE study in 2001 that showed that roughly 50% of homes and 85% of businesses already had water damage, water staining, mold, visible mold, etc. So it's out there unless when I wasn't looking, somebody went and remediated all these places. Those places are still moldy. So what are we looking for? Well, we start with visible mold. If you can see it, it's there. Because, every place has mold. And if I were to culture you guys' skin right now, I would find mold living on there. And if I took you in the shower and scrubbed you down and then cultured your skin again, even before you got out of the shower, I'd still find mold, hopefully less. Okay, so we can't be totally mold-free. But the molds that are blowing around in the wind or the molds that are on your skin are looking for food and water. Until then, when they're in spore form, they're kind of like bears that are hibernating. They're not doing anything. They've got their body systems doing as little as possible to keep themselves alive until they wake up. What wakes them up? Well, it's two things. Food, which is like sheetrock or false ceiling or insulation, and water. They got to have both. Now, the way we design our buildings, you're not supposed to get water to where the paper containing building materials are, like the sheetrock. But once they are, those molds will explosively grow by a factor of thousands. So I wanted to make that distinction that the indoor mold is what's really bad for you. Walking outside and whatnot, that affects very few people. But indoor mold gets wet, bad, explosive. And then you asked a question, oh, what do you look for? Visible mold. So if you can see it, it's too much. Okay? The second thing, if you can smell it, it's too much. And I'm not making that up. That's what the CDC says, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. They say if you can see it or smell it, it's there. Most of the time, you don't even need to have a professional come in and do the testing. You just need to remediate it. You need to get rid of the problem. So those are the first two things. The next things that I look for are signs of water damage, like staining on the ceiling would suggest that, you know, maybe a pipe above the ceiling or maybe a roof leak or something like that was causing some water penetration. Or it could be on the walls too. You could actually see visible staining. Usually it's dripping down from the bottom, but not always. I look for other signs of water damage, like maybe the paint is bubbling. Maybe the little band, I can't think of the word right now, that little band down at the bottom of the wall. Yeah, maybe that's bowing, you know, if it's wood, or if it's plastic, maybe it's pulling away. Or maybe you see warping of the sheetrock, either in the ceiling or on the wall. They're just a host of things like that. You can also check your humidity. Now in Las Vegas, that's probably not a problem. But if you live in Miami, for instance, where it's, you know, 80, 90% humidity most of the time, or certainly certain seasons out of the year, you want to make sure that the humidity inside your home is less than 60%. In fact, most of the people I know that do this for a living, from the environmental side, they say less than 55%, or even better, less than 50%. And oftentimes the air conditioners that they have, I mean, that's their job. Cool the air down, take the humidity out. Yeah. Oftentimes they're not potent enough to do that. So you have to get a dehumidifier or multiple dehumidifiers to pull the humidity out of the air. Because if it's at 60% or higher, it promotes mold growth on the walls and on the ceilings, etc. Behind furniture and the like. You want to take a look at the windows, where the windows are being sealed. If you can see any changes there, or stains or water damage or whatnot, usually it means the windows aren't fitted right and you're getting condensation there. You probably need to periodically take a look at the vents where your air conditioner are using. If you're seeing some discoloration or staining there, that can be problematic. And that can be not just the vents, but you can have condensation all the way along any tubing you have, particularly if you have flexible tubing that has, you know, little corrugations and whatnot. It's little eddies where the mold can grow, but it can go all the way back to the HVAC and to the coil itself. And if you got mold on the coil, then every time it blows, you're spreading it all through your house. So those are some of the common things that I look for. I guess a couple other things. If you have a flat roof, good chance you've had a leak. It's hard to tell until you can actually see it on the bottom part of your ceiling. And then if you have a basement or a crawl space under your house, yeah, those are affecting probably 90% of the houses that I've dealt with. And I don't deal with the house. I deal with the people that live there. But when they get inspection, crawl space and basement are usually bad.
Yeah, I noticed you mentioned Vegas is less likely because it's so hot. I remember one time I had bought my son a portable air conditioner in his room, and he had to have this tube that went outside, and it stopped and it backed up, and it just flooded the whole carpet. Had to have the whole carpet removed, and I was really concerned that it was mold. And he was like, no, it's too hot here. You know, it's not going to grow, so don't worry about it. He just kept the carpet off of it for a couple of days and put it back down. So it really depends on kind of where you live as far as that goes.
Not true. So his assumption is not correct. I live in the middle of the desert. We're not quite as hot as Las Vegas. We don't have as long a hot season, but we get 110, 115 here, probably at least once or twice a year. We're between 100 and 108, probably 20 days out of the year. We have some temperate winters. Half my mold cases came from where I live.
Ouch.
Wow.
Yeah, so it happens. Where I live, we have a lot of flat roof buildings. Flat roofs don't get maintained. They leak. The water, water stays on top. We only get rain, 3-4 times a year. But when it rains, the water settles on there, and water finds a way through. I mean, that's what it does.
Yeah.
What else do we have? We have our HVACs running all the time, and even though our humidity is lower, they're running all the time.
Yeah.
If we're not properly servicing them, changing the filters out, we get condensation. Condensation is water. That's that tube that you were describing. If it got backed up, then it's going to go in and it's going to spill all over. We also have a lot of carpet, that when it gets water, you get mold there. So we have plenty of mold in Roswell.
Now, showers can add to that process also, like you said, with the humidity.
I'm sorry, the what?
Showers.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In your bathroom, if you don't have a vent or you don't open a window, you absolutely can get condensation on the top of the ceiling. Like if you don't have either of those and you take a long hot shower, when you're done, you're going to have water on the ceiling and it'll drip down. And if you keep doing that, you're going to probably get mold there too.
Sorry, Flex, I have one more question on this one. So Flex and I both have dogs. Pets coming into the house, can that be an issue also, tracking? Well, pets doing what pets do anyway, but then tracking.
Whatever they do. So I think that is a part of the problem, but I think it's a small part of the problem.
Okay.
So in the same way that, the molds blowing outside and whatnot are not that big of a deal because they're not metabolically active because they don't have food and water. So they don't make toxins. They don't reproduce. They're just waiting for the right conditions. And they can come in on the pets. They can come in on your clothes and whatnot. The bigger problem is when water gets to paper-containing building materials.
Okay.
Wow. Well, Dr. Scott, I really appreciate, first and foremost, I didn't know that you taking my case and having a video discussion with me with my results and everything like that. But again, thank you so much for coming on, for scaring the hell out of all of us and making us wonder, because I can't imagine anyone not having 2 or 3 of those symptoms going on. I really appreciate it. And I want to encourage everybody to go to www.mold.com and look up there.
Moldco.
Moldco. MOLDCO.
Tickers at the bottom.
Moldco.com and check and see if they can get their test done and everything like that.
Absolutely. And thank you, Flex, and thank you, Greg, for inviting me on here. The average is 2 to 3 symptoms of the things that I talked about. I'm a lot more concerned if you're starting to look at, 8 or 10 or 13 of those kind of symptoms, then you're probably on this pathway because there's no other illness that I know of that causes all of these symptoms. And then we can show that you have it or not through blood work if need be.
And there's something that you guys can take that they can take if they have that you can prescribe also.
Exactly. I mean, if anything, if I'm allowed, I want people to have hope because most of the people that I dealt with when I was in practice had gone to see 5, 10, 15, 30. One family had seen 50 physicians around the country and never got an answer to what was wrong with them. Now, that was years ago, and there's a lot more awareness now. But it still takes 2 to 5 years for people to hear about this, even if they go to the internet. But that's the answer. And then on the internet, there's some disinformation too.
Sure.
And so you can go the wrong direction. So, but I want to give people hope that there is a right way to do this. There is a way to get diagnosed. There is a way to get treated. There is a way to fix your house so that you can get the vast majority of your health back.
Well,
look better naked.
Yeah. Well, I really want to also thank you.
I feel like
so many.
you guys mind if I take my shirt off?
Yeah, this is rated.
Okay, I won't.
Yeah, this is rated PG.
Don't make the people feel bad.
Yeah, definitely.
I
Yeah.
don't think so.
You don't want to make
My wife
everybody
would
feel
be
bad, make them feel insecure about themselves. But, you know, on a personal note, I just want to thank you because there's so many physicians out there that are just in it for the business, in it for the money. It's not often, even though there's a lot of them out there, it's not often that we run into physicians that actually really care and take the personal time to dive into a person's deeper situation. So thank you for your commitment of excellence in that. And there we go. Another episode of Flex for Life. Please like, follow, and subscribe. Thank you again, Dr. Scott and my co-host, Greg. We'll see you next time.
Thank you guys. Take care.